Hey everyone, I am Mike Settele, and this is a follow-up video to my other lesson on what makes an SAT question hard. Specifically, that lesson was all about trying to understand the differences between easy, medium, and hard questions in the SAT, and my main advice was not to neglect the easy and medium ones. A big mistake that people make is when they use something like the SAT question bank, they filter out the easy and medium ones and only practice with hard questions, and maybe that's because that's the only thing they're getting wrong on the practice tests. But that's a mistake. There is a lot of great information that those easy and medium ones contain. And we do need to practice those even if we're getting them right, because if we're not getting them right efficiently, then that's going to bleed over into the hard questions. We need to be lightning fast through the easy and medium ones to have enough time for those hard ones. But even more than that, the easy and medium ones are testing the same basic fundamental skills that show up in the hard ones. The difference is the hard ones have got a lot going on and they're trying to disguise things so it's hard to recognize those topics. But if you can master those easy and medium ones, it's going to be a lot easier to identify the problems that you have when you're working on the hard ones and get stuck. So with that in mind, I thought it would be helpful for you to see that progression from easy to medium to hard in action. So what we'll do in this lesson is look at 3 math questions, easy, medium, hard, that all focus on the same basic idea, and then 3 reading grammar questions that all focus on the same rule, and you can see how the SAT is adding layers, adding twists to take that same basic idea and make it much harder for the harder questions. So we'll go through in that order, easy, medium, hard for each. And my hope is that by the end, you understand why it's so helpful to work on easy and medium questions, even if you're not getting them wrong, because they help you develop the skills that you are really going to need for those hard ones. So let's get into it. So we're going to start off with our easy math question. Feel free to pause this video and try it on your own if you would like, but I'll be quite honest, this is the kind of question that you need to be able to solve confidently basically by the time I finish reading it. So I'm just going to dive in. Line J is defined by y equals negative 5x plus 4. Line J is perpendicular to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line K? It is 1/5. That is literally the total amount of work I would put into this question if I saw it on an SAT, because I know how perpendicular lines work, specifically how their slopes work. If the slope of line J is negative 5/1, the perpendicular slope to that is going to be the negative reciprocal. So just flip it upside down and get rid of that negative, and there you go, it's 1/5. This is obvious if you've been studying and you know this particular fact. That is what makes it an easy question. There's no other element to the question at all. It's just this one fact. You either know it or you don't. And so easy SAT questions, especially in math, are usually going to focus on one particular topic, one particular skill, one fact, one formula, something very simple that is supposed to be memorized through school in some way. And then as we will see, when we get to the medium and hard questions, they're going to take those exact same facts and start layering other things on top of them. So we'll look at that when we get to the medium and the hard one. But this gets to why I think even someone scoring a 750 or better in math right now still should be practicing the easy questions. Is what they basically do is they distill the SAT down to its most fundamental pieces. And so when you are struggling on a medium or a hard question, there's so many other things going on that it's hard to identify what specific weakness you have. Whereas if you do an easy question and it's not easy for you, then that kind of helps you identify a skill, right? If this took you more than 5 seconds to answer, that's because you are not confidently memorizing a basic fact about lines and perpendicular slopes. That's going to cost you when it gets to a medium or a hard question that also uses this fact. So let the easy ones be a good way to practice some of these fundamental things, so that way when you get to the medium and hard ones, you know that these kinds of basic ideas are well memorized and that's not the thing that's holding you back. So this is our medium math question. It's definitely going to have a few more twists, maybe a couple more topics than the basic easy question, but you'll see that it still basically orbits around the same fundamental idea, the fundamental fact about perpendicular lines. So let me kind of narrate as I go through it how I would know that this is a little bit harder and how I would deal with those little twists. In the xy plane, line J passes through the point 5,2 and crosses the y-axis at 6. If line J is perpendicular to line K, what is the slope of line K? So right away as I read this, I know that I'm going to use that same fact that perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. I know that I want to end up with the slope of line K, so in order to do that, I need the slope of line J. I know my ending thing. I know my last step here. But they put some more obstacles in the way of getting the slope of line J. Remember, the easy question just gave me y equals mx plus b, and so I just had the slope. It was presented to me easily in the formula. Here, I'm going to have to work for it. But this is a classic move that the SAT uses to take a very fundamental, easy fact and start to make it a little bit harder. They're going to give you more steps, more topics. But this is also where the strategies really help me out. I'm always thinking in terms of plug points into equations. So without really any hesitation, I'm writing y equals mx plus b on my page, and I'm hoping to start filling things out because I know eventually I want to solve for that m, but I can kind of fill in these other pieces to get there. So the point is easy, right? I have a point. So that gives me a y value of 2 and an x value of 5. Now I'd love to have a y-intercept. And this is another example of the SAT twisting things up, making things a little bit harder for just no real reason other than to make it harder. They do give me a y-intercept, but instead of using the words y-intercept, they're disguising it a little bit, right? They're talking about the point where it crosses the y-axis. So when they say it crosses the y-axis at 6, that is telling me that the y-intercept is 6. But why not just say the y-intercept is 6? Well, this is how they make it harder, right? So when you start to see them increasing the difficulty, they're still focused on very fundamental ideas like y equals mx plus b and y-intercepts. But they're just finding a little bit weirder of a way to talk about it, to disguise those fundamental facts. So I have everything I need. I'm going to put this in here for b. So now I just, again, kind of out of habit, I'm going to solve for m because that's, just kind of what you do when you have an equation with one variable. So I would subtract 6, I would get negative 4 is equal to 5m, and I would divide by 5. And that gives me a slope of line J of negative 4/5. Now that needs to be perpendicular to line K. So this is where that basic fact comes back in. How do you find the slopes of perpendicular lines? You do the negative reciprocal of the original slope. So that would be now 5/4, and it's positive. So there you go. That's what I would put in. This question, if I weren't talking through it, would have taken me maybe a minute, but more likely 30 seconds, 45 seconds, because every step here is still very, very fundamental. Medium questions are harder because they're taking a few different topics and putting them together. But those topics, those ideas are usually still very straightforward. And like I said, strategies help us out a lot because they give us a first step if we're a little bit confused. That's the greatest thing about plug points into equations is it's kind of always giving us a starting instruction that we really want to follow. And sometimes, like with y equals mx plus b, we have to provide the equation ourselves. But none of these steps should be slowing you down. They should all feel very, very automatic. If they are not, that is why you need to practice medium questions. We're going to need to do this exact same stuff in a harder question, but it's going to be even harder. It's going to be even more stuff going on. So if you are not quick and efficient with something like this, then the hard one is going to be hard in ways that you could have practiced with these medium questions. Now, if you saw this on an SAT, you would probably know it's a hard question before you even read a word of it, just based on those answer choices. But also, just based on those answer choices, I've already got an idea that I'm probably going to arithmetize this question. There's 4 different letters in the choices. I'm probably making something up because, well, that's one way of untwisting some of the harder stuff. But let's read it. And again, I'll talk about what makes this hard, what the SAT is doing to increase that difficulty from that very easy idea about perpendicular lines that we've now seen gets better, it gets harder and harder as you go and try to make it more twisted. So let's take a look. In the XY plane, circle O has center HK. Line J is tangent to circle O at point AB, where A is greater than H and B is greater than K. Which of the following represents the y-intercept of line J in terms of A, B, H, and K? So again, as soon as I start looking at this thing, I know I'm picking numbers because they're telling me things about H and K, they're telling me things about A and B, but they're never giving me numbers. It seems pretty safe to just make some up and arithmetize this question. And this is why you got to practice easy and medium questions, is in order to be good enough at arithmetizing, to be able to do this very quickly and confidently, you need to be able to practice arithmetizing on the medium questions that come before this. Now, this question is also strange because it's still about perpendicular lines, but it doesn't actually say that anywhere in here. And this is, again, where doing the medium questions, the easy questions, starts to alert you to those fundamental building blocks that even the hard SAT questions are made up of. Now, I know that when we're talking about a line tangent to a circle, we're going to form perpendicular lines because a tangent line is always perpendicular to the radius of a circle. So let's start drawing this thing, okay? So I've got a circle, I've got some line that's going through it, and then here's my radius, and this radius, if I was a better artist, would be perpendicular to, in this case, line J, right? So that's basically what's happening, is they're going to, in some way, make me think about the perpendicular line formula, but they did a very, very good job of disguising it. But because I've studied my easy and medium questions, I know the fundamental building blocks that these hard ones are made up of. So it doesn't take me very long to connect those dots, like very literally here, but also the conceptual dots of solving this question. So let's start to make some better sense of this thing, right? I have a circle, and I can see that somehow I'm going to need the center, but I'm going to make the center into the origin. I'm going to make the center of this circle 0, 0. So that's my H and my K. Why am I doing that? Laziness. And this is a good example too of, because I practiced arithmetizing on easier questions, I know when I can do a lazy thing on a hard one and get away with it. In fact, it's really going to help me out here. So I'm making that, I'm going to make that 0, 0. So I'm untwisting this question. We're getting rid of some of the letters. I also need to pick values of A and B. So those just need to be this point right here. So this is my AB point. I don't know, should we just make it 1, 1? That seems pretty good. Now, if I do that, right, let's see what happens. I want to get the slope of this line so that I can eventually get the slope of the other line, because I know that I need to end up with this y-intercept. So this is, I want to call it B, but there's already a B in the question. So let's call it C, just to kind of have a different letter, right? So why do I know that I need the slope? Well, because I'm also thinking if I have a line, it's going to follow the y equals mx plus b equation. I know I want to end up with the b, which in this case, of course, is C, right? So let's try to pencil over that. So that means I need a point, which I've got. That's the AB point that I'm going to pick a number for. And I need the slope. And then if I have those two things, then I can fill in all the missing pieces of y equals mx plus b and solve for the y-intercept. This is just plug points in equations. That mentality just kind of runs through me. I'm always thinking if I have points and I have equations, just plug them in. So y equals mx plus b is a very safe equation when you're dealing with lines. But this is where I start to already question my methods a little bit, because if I'm starting to think about the slope of this radius, okay, I have 2 points, so I can use slope formula, which is y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2, right? So if I use these 2 points, I'm going to have 1 minus 0 over 1 minus 0, which is just 1 over 1. And the problem with that, I could be wrong, but my experience with arithmetizing and these kinds of questions tells me that that might be risky, because 1 over 1, when I get the negative reciprocal and do the perpendicular slope, is also going to be a 1 over 1. It'll be negative 1 over 1, but I don't love that. I just have a feeling that the 2 1s are going to mess me up in some way. So I'm going to make an adjustment. Instead of making AB 1, 1, let's make it 2, 1. Let's just change one of those, right? So let's put this here so I don't forget it either. If I make it 2, 1, right? Then the top of the slope formula, y1 minus y2, is still 1 minus 0, right? That's the y coordinates. Then the bottom now is 2 minus 0, meaning my slope of the radius, this is the radius, is 1/2, okay? Now we start using this fact about the tangent line, which is really a fact about perpendicular lines. So a slope of 1/2 is going to be perpendicular to a slope of negative 2 over 1. So that is my slope of line J, all right? Now that goes in here. So I have J, the slope of line J is negative 2. I have an X and a Y. That's what this point was, right? I just need any point on the line to be able to plug into X and Y. Again, I have a lot of experience plugging points into equations. So when it gets to a hard one like this, I'm not hesitating at all. This is purely just robot brain going here because I'm so experienced with it. So 1 is my Y coordinate. My x coordinate is 2, and c is what I'm solving for. That's the y-intercept. So negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Let's add that 4 to both sides, and we solve that c is equal to 5. So that's my answer. C is 5. The y-intercept here is 5. But obviously these answer choices don't look like that, but I can quickly do them. And again, this is where practicing on medium questions helps me out, as I do a lot of arithmetizing and plugging points into equations on those kind of questions. And so now when I have to plug in 4 different letters, I'm pretty experienced at it. So this is not going to be hard. I don't need a calculator here. A is 2, so 2 times 2 minus 0, because h is 0, is 2, over b is 1, so 1, and k is 0, so 1, so minus 1, right? So 2 times 2 is 4, 4 minus 1 is 3. No. Let's just keep going. 2 times 2 over 1 plus 1. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. That looks good, but let's check everything. This is going to be 2 times 1 over 2 plus 1. So these cancel. We get 2. So that doesn't work. And this is going to be negative 2 times 1 over 2 plus 1. So these cancel. We have negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So there you go. And B is the answer. And there are other algebraic ways to do it. Feel free to comment with it and maybe I'll move it to the top, but I don't really care about that because that kind of misses the whole point of these hard questions. Is we want to be able to very quickly take the right facts, in this case about tangents and perpendicular lines, the right strategies, the right kinds of moves, things like plug points into equations, and we want to be able to move from one step to the next very, very quickly. A hard question might have a lot of steps. It might be tedious, it might be annoying, it might be tricky, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And so I think what happens to a lot of people is they try to approach these hard questions as if there's something to memorize, in the same way that when we approach the easy question, there is something to memorize, right? There's a fact or a set of steps that we need to perform, something like what we would do to solve for x, right? Those are fundamental facts to mathematics. They're going to be fundamental facts to the easy questions. We'll see a similar thing going on in the reading section. But what the SAT is doing when they start to make it harder is they're taking a bunch of facts and a bunch of twists to disguise those facts and adding them together. There is nothing to memorize here that is unique to the hard questions. It's all the same stuff we had to memorize for easy ones. It's just it's a lot of it all at once, right? That's what it means for something to be a hard question, is it's taking a lot of those fundamental easy building blocks and it's putting them together. So that's why I always say, at least for math, you got to practice the easy questions so that you can make sure you know those building blocks really well. If you do not know very quickly the way that perpendicular lines relate, what a tangent line of a circle does to the radius, how to find a slope using the slope formula, if you don't know those fundamental facts, of course you're going to struggle with the hard questions. So use the easy ones to make sure you know that. Then use the medium questions to start practicing when they add layers and add different things to make a question a little bit harder. There won't be as many layers as this question has, but you can start to get the rhythms down of how quickly you recognize when to arithmetize or plug points into equations. That is really important so that when you get to these hard ones, you have all the skills and all the knowledge you need to solve them confidently. This is hard and annoying, but it is not something I would have any doubt about at any step of my process. All right, so now we're going to reset things a little bit. We're going to look at an easy reading question. Specifically, we're going to look at a grammar question because that is a very quick, easy way for me to kind of show you how that difficulty increases and how they can test a very fundamental rule and start to make it harder. So this is the easy version. As always, I would look at the answer choices first for a grammar question, try to figure out what rule it is. Because I'm experienced, I know that this is the to and ing grammar rule. That is my name for it because it involves verbs that have tos and ings, right? There's a to, there's an ing. So that probably is going to impact the structure of the sentence in some way. But I guess my mistake here is I'm talking like someone who knows the SAT, when what makes this an easy question is that you don't need to know the SAT or any of the rules that are on it to get it right. Let's take a look. Matthew Brady, a prominent studio photographer in 19th century America, established his reputation by capturing detailed portraits of notable figures during the Civil War era, including his extensive documentation of military leaders, which laid the foundation for modern photojournalism. Notice, I would genuinely do this on the real test. I see there's 4 answers, but already as I'm kind of reading it, there's one that feels like it fits. Now, I am going all the way to the end and reading the full sentence just in case, I don't know, something changes somewhere in the sentence and that thing that feels right in that spot is actually wrong because of what's coming. But this is the kind of question that you don't even need to realize as an SAT question to get it right. most of us are going to have a just kind of clear instinct for which verb fits in that blank. We might know a little bit of the grammar here. We might recognize that these commas are telling us that this is an extra clause. And so we can cross that out to hear it better. Matthew Brady established his reputation by capturing detailed portraits of notable figures. Sounds great. Now, if we tried into these other answers, we would see that they don't really sound good at all, right? Matthew Brady establishing his reputation by capturing detailed portraits of notable figures during the Civil War era, including his extensive documentation of military leaders, which laid the foundation for modern photojournalism. I don't need to know any grammar rules to know that that doesn't sound good, right? It just sounds like I'm kind of like building towards something that I never get there, right? It's not a real sentence. So this is fundamental to how a lot of easy questions will look in the grammar part of the reading section, right? They're going to involve rules that are real grammar rules, but you don't really need to know them in order to get them right because our instincts are going to be trustworthy. Now, the big problem we have as we move into the medium and hard questions is they're going to test the same rules and we are going to have instincts, but they might not be as useful. So this is our medium reading grammar question. Once again, if I were taking an SAT and I saw this question, I would immediately recognize that it is the to and ing rule. So it is the same thing we just technically did in the easy question. I would know that because I've got a to, an ing, some other stuff going on. So I know what this rule entails, but still, most of us are just going to read it and try to figure things out. So Inigo Coltrane was a renowned portrait artist whose innovative techniques revolutionized 18th century painting. He masterfully combined bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses to capture his subject's characteristics in ways that were imitated by generations of artists long after Coltrane's death. So I just put choice A in to have something. I need to kind of hear something in that sentence, and it sounds pretty good, but maybe I would try the others. He masterfully combined bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses, capturing his subject's characteristics in ways that were imitated by generations of artists long after Coltrane's death. That sounds pretty good too. Now, if I go to C, he masterfully combined bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses, captured his subject's characteristics in ways that were imitated by generations of artists long after Coltrane's death. That almost sounds like I'm about to kind of like start a list of things and then I stop, right? Where the list would almost be like combined, captured, and then some other verb in the past tense. And this is starting to get into where like knowing the rules on the SAT is going to help you because they do test the past, present, and future tenses of verbs. And so a lot of people are going to see that word combine and just be like, oh, we got to do captured. It's the same thing. But no, this isn't about that. There are other verb tense rules. This to and ing is one of them. So already I'm starting to recognize that the strategy is helping me here. With grammar, our most important strategy is to predict the rule before we start solving the question so that we're not biased by things that don't matter. The fact that this is an ed tense, the past tense, does not matter at all. I know that because that to and ing choice are there, and those matter because of what this rule is about. So we're not there yet, but the same thing is going to happen to D that happened to C, I think, is we're going to hear that it's wrong, I hope, if we put in the blank. He masterfully combined bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses, had captured his subject's characteristics in ways that were imitated by generations of artists long after Coltrane's death. Just doesn't sound like a sentence. So hopefully you hear that. But this is the end of where I think instinct is going to help us. Some of you are going to continue to read this and just read it with A, read it with B, read it with A again, read it with B again, keep going back and forth, and they both sound decent. Maybe one of them you have a slight preference for, but unless you have a real concrete reason to pick your answer choice, you're not really answering this in the right way. This is not a question where we're picking what sounds best. There is a concrete rule here, and the concrete rule is that the to and ing rule is really all about sentence structure. So this is why the easy one was so easy. We can hear basic sentences and understand their structures as we read the sentence, right? So we can hear the easy questions and we can hear whether the structure that answer choice is producing is good or bad. Here we're hearing numbers, letters C and D, we're hearing that those are bad, but A and B are too close. There's more to it. We need to think about how the sentence itself, that the rest of the sentence, not in the blank, is affecting the structure of what's going on in that blank. And for me, because I've studied these rules, including on easy and medium questions, I know that the answer is B without any doubt. And it has nothing to do with how it sounds. It has everything to do with this little comma right before the blank. That comma forces my hand and makes me use the ing. I have a whole lesson on this rule. It's so important that you pay attention to these little details. And that's why identifying that it's the to and ing rule first really, really helps. Because now I'm thinking, what impacts sentence structure? Punctuation. If there's no comma, then A is the answer. And I think it's a little bit of a trap because I honestly think A sounds a little bit better than B. But I don't have a choice. It's got to be B because that comma is telling me that we have an extra clause coming after this list of things. And there you go. That's another little twist that the SAT is inserting to make this question harder. It's a medium question because we can still kind of hear our way to the answer. And there are clear, predictable twists that we can untwist to get the answer confidently, but they're definitely doing things to try to mislead us. This list of things before the blank is there to kind of dilute the comma that matters. The other two commas do not matter. They are part of the list. Brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, unconventional poses. The comma that comes after poses has a completely different purpose. It is there to add an extra clause, but it gets kind of blended in with all those other commas because of the list. So that is a choice that the SAT is going to make that takes an easy question and turns it into a medium one. And we're going to see hard ones are going to have even more things to kind of misdirect us when something like a comma might matter a lot. So now here is our hard version of this to and ing rule that we've been talking about. But here's the thing, remember, the reading questions are not in order of difficulty when they show up on both modules, both the first module and the hard module. So you don't actually know if you have an easy, medium, or hard question as you're working on it. There are easy questions in the hard module. There are hard questions in the first module and in the easy module. So there's a little bit of everything everywhere. So that's why we have to always be thinking maybe this is a hard question even when it's an easy one, so that we're prepared for the traps. So just like any grammar question, I would be looking at the answer choices first. And I would notice that these ones are a little different. This time it would be a little harder for me to understand what rule applies to this question. But I notice a couple things. I do notice that it has verbs that are kind of changing, right? Is considered, considered, consider it. So that involves verb tense, and to and ing is one of our verb tense rules. There are others. Again, I talk about them in other lessons. But I also notice that there's a comma that's coming and going. And so the to and ing rule, remember, that's just my kind of shorthand name for a rule that really has to do with the structure of the sentence. And in a lot of ways, the punctuation of the sentence is determining the structure. So there's a lot of clues in these choices that warn me that this is probably that to and ing rule. So already I'm thinking, when you read this, Mike, you better be careful of all the different punctuation marks in the sentence. You better not trust your instincts right away because they might be wrong. And I think that's why people get hard questions wrong, is they don't know when they can trust their instincts and when they can't, and they just do their instincts the entire time. Now, if I'm following my instincts here, there's a clear answer. Thomas Young's famed double-slit experiment is considered truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light. C is 100% the obvious answer, but it's also 100% wrong. And I would know that because I can sense right away, just again from the choices, this is probably a hard version of this rule, or at least that this rule, even when it's not that hard, has potential traps that I need to watch out for. So the trap is usually that you stop reading too early and something else happens in the sentence. So let's start over. Thomas Young's famed double-slit experiment is considered truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light. Is, for various reasons beyond anything Young could have imagined, still performed regularly by physicists to this day. Well, to me, instinct helps here. This sounds really, really weird when I put choice C into that blank. So if I just keep reading, I realize, whoa, wait a minute, this doesn't work. Something is off. Now, I don't have a solution to this problem yet, but now, knowing it's the to and ing rule, knowing that sentence structure matters, seeing a bunch of commas with surrounding the word is for some reason, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. So now I'm like, okay, we got to really settle down here and try to figure out what the heck is this sentence trying to say? And when this is the game of a question, then I do have to sometimes do a little trial and error and figure out what's an extra clause and what's part of the main sentence. So it's not obvious to me what the right version of the sentence is, but I know that I can play with it and figure it out. I think that this is going to be a big piece because there's no reason to just insert random verbs into sentences, right? That is needs something. And then, of course, there's a comma after it. So maybe then that is interrupting the sentence in some way. And for various reasons beyond anything Young could have imagined, ends in a comma and seems like an extra clause. So it seems like at least I found the end of the sentence. Something is still performed regularly. Okay, well, before the is a comma. So that suggests, again, there's some sort of break in the sentence. There's some sort of interruption here. But then where's the beginning of that interruption, right? It's not the beginning of the sentence. We can't start the sentence with is. So I'm now looking at basically choices A and D, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, there must be this comma needs to be there to kind of tell me there's an extra clause. So that would mean that Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is the main sentence. How does that sound? Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. That sounds good. I can trust my instincts when I'm listening for a sentence and I've got that kind of short version. That sounds like a sentence. And I'm using the commas that are there and the one that the choices includes to just kind of figure out what might be extra clauses. So that's gonna confidently get rid of B and C for me. B, just to talk about it, is close. The problem there is there's no comma. If it said Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment, considered truly groundbreaking for what revealed about the nature of light, is still performed regularly by physicists to this day, and there was a comma right there, then I've got an extra clause, and it would be a valid extra clause. But without the comma, it's just a continuation. So this is, again, an example where just sound alone might not do it for you. We learned that commas are pauses, but that's not a really good rule. You pause for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes I just pause, take a breath when I'm reading. It is what it is. So you have to understand the reason the comma is there. A comma, in a way, doesn't really make a sound. So you really have to understand it regardless of whether you're pausing at that spot. So for me, I would look at A just because it's top of the list. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment, to consider it truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light, is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. No, I can hear that that's off. To consider it truly groundbreaking, it sounds like then I'm about to say, like, to consider truly groundbreaking, a person needs to know a lot about physics, right? Like it feels like it's got to lead into something else. It's almost like a dangling modifier here. So let's just try D, which completely removes this verb entirely. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment, truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light, is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. Well, it's not the version of the sentence I would write. I'd probably, again, write something more like B, but throw that comma in there. But it does work. Truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light is just an extra little descriptive clause. We're using two commas to insert that description into the middle of the sentence. It's not the prettiest sentence, but it's grammatically allowed. So I actually think, yes, this is a hard question technically, but it's certainly a predictably hard question. This is not the kind of thing you can afford to get wrong if you're looking for top scores. And this is why, again, we need to be very good at practicing the easy and medium ones so we can understand how the to and ing rule, or any rule, works on those kind of more fundamental basic levels. So you can start to hear the good structures versus the bad structures, what makes something a complete sentence, what makes it an extra clause. So if you're only doing the hard grammar questions, you're just throwing yourself into the deep end of the pool. You don't know how to swim. You don't know what's going on with these basic fundamental things when they're easier, and you're not developing the skills for picking a sentence apart and figuring out what the pieces do. So you're just kind of dealing with this mess of words and commas that just doesn't really make sense to you. So I can get this question very confidently because I understand how the rule works and the easy and medium levels. What the SAT is doing here is testing the exact same thing. The way that different verb forms, the to form, the ing form, in this case, no form, right? Then choice D, how those different things affect the structure of the sentence. So there's no set like always do this, never do that. It's more just kind of feel it out but you got to be able to understand how that rule works in a very basic way to understand then when they throw all these twists in here, where they're giving you a sentence that doesn't even sound that good when it's right. They're throwing an is in the middle of a sentence and just kind of separating it out completely from the rest of the sentence with extra clauses. That's insane. That's not how good writing works, but it's a classic SAT twist to try to misdirect you. And I knew as well that something like choice C would be a trap because I know that the to and ing rule, when it's very hard, is going to involve these kind of misdirection elements. They're going to try to get you to hear the wrong answer by just kind of stopping short. So all these things come together to make this hard question very predictable for me. I knew exactly what they were going to do. I knew exactly how to counter their moves. And that is why we need to study easy and medium questions, to work your way up, to get prepared for when they do this stuff so you can untwist it in lots of different ways to get back to that fundamental rule that in theory you would know from the easy and medium questions. Well, I hope that gave you a better idea of how the SAT is basically coming up with the questions that appear on the test, the easy, medium, and hard ones. Trying to understand that progression is going to be really helpful as you progress through easy, medium, and hard questions on an exam. Just realize that even the hardest questions are still testing very fundamental, very basic ideas. They're just adding lots of layers, they're trying to disguise the topics as best they can, and they're twisting things up to hopefully get you to fall for a trap. But if you've been practicing, you will not fall for those traps. Really what we want to make sure we're doing is using the strategies to untwist all the stuff that the SAT is doing and remove those layers and get back down to basic ideas. It is very, very rare for when I take an SAT that I look at a hard question and I feel surprised by anything in it. I might have to go through a lot of steps, but I still recognize that even on the hardest questions, each and every one of those steps is something that could show up separately on an easy question. I'm using the exact same skills on the hard ones that I use on the easy ones. So when you're practicing for the SAT, my advice is to make sure you are also practicing easy and medium questions, even if you're only getting the hard ones wrong. And when you practice those easy and medium ones, force yourself to think strategically, force yourself to be as fast as possible. If you want more time for those hard ones, you've got to be lightning fast, super efficient on the easy and medium ones. If you have any more questions about question difficulty on the SAT or anything related to the test, feel free to put them in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you're looking for more questions like the ones that I wrote in this video, become a channel member. I've got hundreds of questions and explanations on my channel just for members, and they're all questions that I wrote. So if you end up using all of that question bank, then you've still got stuff to use on my channel. Once again, I'm Mike Settele. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less. Settele for more.